9 is the time, so just before the news headlines, we played you a brief clip, as it's called, or some of what the Liz Truss has been saying. She's in Moscow now. We know that the Prime Minister will travel later today to Brussels for a summit, and the Defence Secretary, from whom you're about to hear, goes to Moscow later this week. So it seems fair to ask what level of progress is being made with all this diplomacy. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace joins me now. We're making much ground, Secretary of State. Good morning.
Well, hopefully we're making ground. Obviously, we saw President Macron go to see President Putin, and the Prime Minister spoke to President Putin earlier in the week, or last week, I think it was. The difficulty at the moment is the actions on the ground of the Russian forces are in the wrong direction. They have continued to grow their forces. They have over 80 battalion tactical groups on the borders in Belarus and in Russia, on the borders of Ukraine. It's over half the combat forces of the Russian armed forces are now concentrated around there. And we see them starting a series of exercises in and around those areas. And we saw recently more aircraft being moved. So that's the very worrying sign, is the direction of travel is in actions the wrong way. But, you know, the Kremlin has been open to diplomatic efforts and talks. I'm going to see probably two of the key men who will be with or in the room with President Putin if he makes the final decision on Ukraine, and that is Minister Shoigu and the Chief of the General Staff, Gerasimov, the leader of the Russian military. And I think it's really important that we land with them the key message, the unified message of NATO and the alliance about what we will and won't do.
When you meet with these officials in the Kremlin or Moscow, wherever you meet, how would you describe their mood towards you and towards our NATO allies?
Well, in the defence posture, it's always a very professional relationship. The Chief of Defence Staff had a phone call with General Gerasimov a few weeks ago. There's a professional respect for each other. We are both people in that room who will bear the consequence of conflict. It will, yes, we have our prime ministers and our presidents, but fundamentally, if President Putin decides to invade Ukraine, it will be Minister Shoigu and General Gerasimov who will bear that responsibility and the conduct of that invasion. And I, as the UK Defence Secretary, will have the responsibility for making sure it doesn't spill over and cause worse security in NATO and European allies, and put us in a place where British lives and our allies' lives are at risk. So I think it's always the case with defence ministers, a much more sort of workmanlike atmosphere. Hopefully it means we can be straight with each other and we don't go through the usual foreign sort of posturings that all happens in other governments. But I think fundamentally, I think hopefully it'll be respectful. I asked Minister Shoigu to come and visit me. He returned saying, well, you can come and visit me, as he'd come to London previously, and I was happy to accept that invitation, and we'll be straight with each other.
Talking of these invitations, I note, Defence Secretary, that you said that President Macron went to see President Putin. Given the length of the table between them, he might have had trouble hearing him. What do we take from the optics of that?
Well, President Putin is very concerned by COVID, and he's taken quite long steps to make sure that he is obviously protected from catching a COVID infection.
Protected? He'd have been in a different postcode, Secretary of State.
Well, look, I think they also, to be fair, in every country, and I've visited, for example, 11 in the last 2 weeks, every country does its political meetings and theatre effectively in its own way. We have guard of honours for our respected visitors. I met my Polish counterpart on Monday, and he had a guard of honour from the Grenadier Guards, and we all do that. You'll often see footage in Russia of President Putin sitting with his closest advisors at a small table in front of his desk. And theatre is always part of diplomacy. We do it, everybody does it. It's an exceptionally long table that I suspect that was probably to do with the COVID precautions that they wanted to take. And I understand that if President Macron wants to travel around Europe, he doesn't want to suddenly find himself isolating. I don't want to have to cancel going to Moscow if I was suddenly to test positive. So we are extra cautious.
The quick answer to this question is ask him. But what might the Prime Minister be hoping to achieve in Brussels later today, Secretary of State?
Well, NATO is an alliance of 30. Keeping that unity together is incredibly important, but it is also an important message to Russia that NATO's members not only are are members, participating members, but they're active members, that we will respond to NATO's request for more forces, which we have done. We've put up 1,000 at readiness, a Typhoon squadron in the south of Europe towards Romania and Bulgaria to help with the air policing, more ships into the Black Sea, more troops into Estonia. I just authorised up to 350 in Poland this week. And we are, one of Europe's biggest powers, and it's very important. As one of the lead members of NATO, we demonstrate that not just our words, but our forces are available to support that alliance and our allies. And I think the Prime Minister going there directly to talk to the Secretary General is an important message. And he will come with a number of offers which we have formulated. We're not the only one to make those offers. All the NATO countries were asked to put in things in the pot, and we'll let NATO decide how it's going to deploy them.
When my listeners heard that I was having you on the programme, some of them got in touch. Dan in Hastings says, my children are in the military. Can you please ask the Secretary of State, how likely is it there's going to be further deployment? We are already in Estonia and in Poland. Secretary of State.
Well, I think that there could potentially be more deployment. We're always ready. This world is far more connected than it has ever been. We've obviously seen with the end of Afghanistan a withdrawal of troops, so there are less troops there. We see that in Mali, where we have troops at the moment, issues between the Malian government and the French that could fundamentally undermine whether we are there in the long term. So our forces do deploy to hotspots. Sadly, there are more hotspots around the world than there has ever been. There's more of a need for Britain's values and resilience that we can provide. And it is absolutely the case that you may well see more forces go to our allies in Eastern Europe or Southern Europe if that is what is required. One of our concerns, Nick, is that if Russia were to do the wrong thing and invade Ukraine, the first thing you would see is potentially millions or hundreds of thousands of refugees crossing into Poland, Romania, other bordering states. And of course, that in itself can destabilize the states. It could lead to miscalculation. It could lead to frictions within those countries. And, soldiers standing side by side, even on a humanitarian footing with Poland or Estonia or Latvia, Lithuania, is a really important step to trying to keep things at a lower level and a calmer level while we deal with what would then be a crisis neighbouring country.
Last couple of questions. This has been a crisis. It's been on your desk, the Prime Minister's desk, for some weeks. How much progress has been made?
Well, I think we've got to a stage where I would say on the plus side, Russia issued a sort of ultimatum of demands to NATO earlier, I think in December. They were very stark. I think we were all very clear that, vast amounts of these were totally unreasonable. We weren't going to close NATO's open door policy. We weren't going to dictate to countries over their heads. We're not going to do that. And I think there's a recognition that is not sustainable as a 100% piece of work, and that there are ways through it. I think President Macron has indicated that the Minsk agreement, which was signed by both Russia and Ukraine, is a very strong way forward, and I would support Macron and the Normandy format in trying to get those delivered, and we will certainly talk to Ukraine as well as Russia on that, and I'll be interested when I visit tomorrow whether the Russians really mean to stick by that. But at the moment, it's slow, the progress, and that's why we have to have a deterrent as well as a dialogue.
So you're going to Moscow later this week. Liz Truss is there today. Emmanuel Macron has been there. When will Boris Johnson go?
Boris Johnson spoke to President Putin only a few days ago.
Physically go. I mean, you know better than most the optics of actual physical encounters or meetings. Is there a reluctance from the Prime Minister to go? Is there a reluctance from President Putin to host the PM? Why has he not been?
I can't speak for President Putin,
no,
but
indeed.
I'm sure if Boris Johnson wants to invite President Putin to come to London or indeed seek to go, then that is exactly something.
Why might he not have gone, Secretary of State?
I think probably at the moment he's already spoken to him on a number of occasions, and in direct phone calls. And I was invited to Moscow because I made the first move of inviting Minister Shoigu to come to London, and he said, "Well, I've already visited there in 2013. It's your turn to come to me." So I think there's no barrier, no resistance.
Okay, final question. It's almost on your brief. When the Labour Party declares that the picture of the Prime Minister appearing to loosen his tie behind a colleague with one string of tinsel around his neck and a half packet of cheese and onion crisps, when Labour described that as a smoking gun, Secretary of State for Defence, would you agree?
There have been so many photographs, Nick. I don't think it's a smoking gun. There's a photograph of Keir Starmer holding a bottle of beer in an office with a whole load of people during lockdown. And if you do a like-for-like comparison of the two, one's got tinsel, one hasn't. I mean, I'm not exactly going to show that. I think our position has been clear. There's a police investigation. I expect the police to do a professional job. They will examine all that evidence that we put forward. The Prime Minister has said he'll publish the Grey Report in full, and I think we should wait for the results of the police investigation.
Happy landings on your trip tomorrow. Thank you for your time today. Secretary of State for Defence Ben Wallace here, 2 minutes after 9, appearing on LBC, where news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Russia and